The wind, a constant companion out here, whispered secrets I'd long stopped trying to decipher. It snaked through the gaps in the ancient monoliths, a low, mournful sound that echoed the hollow space in my chest. I traced the rough, grey surface of one of the stones with a gloved finger. The standing stone circle, older than recorded history, was my sanctuary. Or perhaps it was my prison. Elena, 3 years. Astrophysics, once my passion, had become my refuge. I'd convinced myself that by understanding the cosmos, I could somehow understand the inexplicable cruelty of fate. It was a fool's errand, I knew, but it was all I had. The sky above was a bruised purple, the first stars beginning to prick through the fading light. It was here, amidst these silent sentinels, that I felt closest to something greater, something that dwarfed my grief, my insignificance. I'd spent countless nights here, my telescope trained on distant nebulae, my mind wrestling with the immense, beautiful, and often terrifying truths of the universe. Tonight, however, felt different. A prickle of unease, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't the usual quietude I found here. It was a charged stillness, as if the very air was holding its breath. I dismissed it as my imagination, a byproduct of too many late nights and too much solitude. My mind, a finely tuned instrument for detecting anomalies in stellar spectra, was perhaps overcompensating for the lack of external stimuli. Back in my cramped study, the glow of my monitors was the only illumination. Stacks of research papers teetered precariously on my desk, a testament to my relentless, almost obsessive pursuit of knowledge. It was a long shot, a romantic notion I'd clung to since childhood. Most of my colleagues had moved on to more practical, observable phenomena. But I couldn't let go of the possibility. Then I saw it, a pattern. Not the usual cosmic static, not the predictable hum of distant galaxies. This was structured. It was a sequence, impossibly complex, repeating with a precision that defied natural explanation. My heart, a traitorous organ that had long forgotten how to flutter, gave a strange lurch. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath catching in my throat. The data was clean, no discernible interference. I ran diagnostics, checked the calibration logs, cross-referenced with other observatories. Every check confirmed it. The signal was real. It wasn't just a signal, it was a message. A vast, intricate tapestry of information woven from prime numbers, fundamental physical constants, and something else. Something that felt alien, utterly foreign to my understanding of mathematics. It was like finding a Shakespearean sonnet embedded within the random churn of a cosmic storm. My hands trembled as I magnified the waveform, tracing the delicate curves and sharp peaks. This was not the product of random chance. This was intelligent. This was not the friendly greeting from a distant civilization I'd fantasized about. This felt ancient, powerful, and utterly, terrifyingly incomprehensible. The sheer scale of the data, the depth of its complexity, suggested an intelligence that had existed for eons, perhaps predating the very stars I studied. I spent the next few days lost in a feverish haze, fueled by black coffee and a gnawing obsession. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. The anomaly consumed me. I isolated the source, triangulating its origin to a point in the sky that defied conventional celestial mapping. Yet from this nothingness, this message emanated. As I dissected the signal, I began to notice subtle correlations, faint echoes that seemed to resonate with terrestrial phenomena, not just random occurrences, but specific events, moments in history that had been marked by inexplicable shifts, by moments of profound, unsettling change. It was a terrifying thought, one I tried to push away, but it clung to me like a shroud. There was this intelligence merely observing, or was it influencing? The standing stone circle, older than recorded history, felt a world away from my sterile laboratory. The sheer age of those stones, their enigmatic purpose, the way they seemed to hum with a silent energy. Could they be related? Could this ancient cosmic intelligence have somehow touched our world, long before humanity even dreamed of looking at the stars? The data pulsed on my monitor, a silent, insistent rhythm that was beginning to feel less like a discovery and more like a warning. What had I awakened? This place, the standing stone circle, older than recorded history, was a place of stillness, of time immemorial, or so I'd thought. My breath plumed in the frigid air, a stark contrast to the warmth I remembered, the warmth of her hand in mine. It had been years, but the ache remained, a dull throb beneath the surface of my carefully constructed detachment. Astrophysics had been my refuge, a place where the universe, vast and indifferent, offered a predictable order. Until now. The data. It had been a ghost in the machine, a flicker at the edge of perception, a deviation in the cosmic microwave background radiation, subtle at first, then persistent. My colleagues, they dismissed it as equipment malfunction, solar flare interference, anything but the impossible. They hadn't seen the patterns, the intricate, almost deliberate, symmetries that defied all known physics, but I had. I still did. I pulled out the portable terminal, its screen a small rectangle of artificial light against the encroaching twilight. The wind howled, a sudden gust that made the monoliths groan. It felt like a warning or a welcome. I wasn't sure which was more terrifying. The screen flickered to life, displaying the familiar cascade of numbers and graphs. Nothing. Just the same steady hum of background noise the universe had always broadcast. Disappointment, a familiar companion, settled in. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps the loss had finally fractured something in my mind. I closed my eyes, trying to recapture the sensation, the almost imperceptible tremor in the data stream that had first alerted me. It was like trying to remember a dream, the edges blurring, the details dissolving. Then it happened. A subtle shift. The ambient temperature on the terminal's internal sensors dropped, not by a degree or two, but by 10. The display flickered, the crisp white lines of the graph wavering as if seen through heat haze. My heart, a traitorous organ, gave a sudden, hard jolt against my ribs. I could feel a prickling sensation on my skin, an awareness of something vast and unseen pressing in. The air grew heavy, thick with an ozone tang that was not of this world. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. The anomaly. It was back, stronger this time. The patterns were clearer, more defined, coalescing into a shape that was both alien and disturbingly familiar. It was like looking at a reflection in a warped mirror, a distorted echo of something I knew, but could not name. The standing stone seemed to hum, a low vibration that I felt more in my bones than heard. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. This was not a malfunction. This was not a misinterpretation. This was real, and it was directed. The data was not just data. It was a message, or a probe, or something else entirely. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. It spoke of an intelligence that dwarfed human comprehension, a consciousness that operated on scales of time and space that rendered our existence infinitesimal. The patterns on the screen resolved further, forming intricate geometric shapes that shifted and reformed with impossible speed. They weren't random. They were deliberate. They were speaking, but in a language I could not understand, a language that bypassed my intellect and struck directly at something deeper, something ancient and buried within my own being. The standing stone circle, older than recorded history, felt like a gateway, and I had just kicked the door open. The wind whipped around me, carrying with it a scent that was not of earth or rain, but of dust and stars and something impossibly, terrifyingly old. The screen glowed brighter, the anomaly consuming the familiar data stream. It was a presence, undeniable and vast, reaching out from the unfathomable depths of the cosmos. And I, Thomas, alone in this ancient place, felt its attention turn, not just to the data, but to me. What was it trying to communicate? This place, this standing stone circle, older than recorded history, always held a certain gravity, a weight of ages that pressed down on my shoulders. But tonight, it felt different. The air itself seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy, a hum just beyond the threshold of hearing. I pulled my heavy coat tighter, the rough wool scratching against my neck. For weeks, I'd been coming here, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion. The data from the deep space array, the anomalous signals that had shattered my carefully constructed understanding of the cosmos, had led me to this forgotten corner of the world. It was a desperate, perhaps even foolish, leap of faith. Astrophysics rarely dealt in ley lines and ancient stone alignments, but the numbers, the sheer wrongness of them, had no other explanation I could find. Back in my makeshift lab, a converted shipping container humming with salvaged equipment, I'd been staring at the spectral analysis. The signals weren't random noise. They were structured, complex almost, deliberate. A pattern, faint but persistent, woven into the fabric of cosmic background radiation. It spoke of an intelligence, vast and ancient, far beyond anything humanity had ever conceived. Here, amidst these silent sentinels, I felt a strange resonance. I'd set up my portable sensor array, a collection of delicate instruments designed to detect subtle gravitational fluctuations and exotic particle emissions. The readings were erratic, spiking and dipping with a rhythm that mirrored the beating of my own heart. I remembered Sarah, her laughter like wind chimes on a summer breeze. How I'd tried to explain the universe to her, the elegant dance of stars, the vast emptiness between worlds. She'd always smiled, a gentle, knowing smile, and told me not to get lost in the numbers, to remember the feeling of being alive. The wind picked up, a sudden gust that whipped my hair across my face and extinguished the small lamp I'd set on a low boulder. The stones loomed, indistinct shapes against the star-dusted canvas of the night sky. My fingers fumbled for the lighter, my hands suddenly clumsy. I held the flickering light to the display of my primary sensor. The anomaly's signature, usually a faint tremor on the screen, was now a violent shudder. It was intensifying, not just intensifying, but shifting, adapting. It was as if the signal itself was becoming aware of my scrutiny. It was a conversation, and I had just made myself known. I zoomed in on the waveform. There, buried within the chaotic fluctuations, I saw it. A secondary pattern superimposed on the primary signal. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like a watermark on ancient parchment. But once seen, it couldn't be unseen. It was a geometric complexity, a fractal recursion that spoke of intelligent design, but on a scale that defied comprehension. It wasn't just a signal from an intelligence, it was a fragment of that intelligence. A tendril reaching out, testing the boundaries of existence. My breath hitched. The patterns weren't just mathematical. They were conceptual, abstract ideas rendered in cosmic energy. And the latest iteration, the one now pulsing from the screen, was disturbingly familiar. It was a distorted echo of something I'd seen before, something buried deep in the forgotten archives of my research. A theoretical model of a collapsing universe. Why here? Why this ancient place? I scanned the stones, their silent, impassive faces illuminated by the weak beam of my lamp. They were older than any civilization, their purpose lost to time. Yet they felt connected to the signal like ancient conduits or anchors. Had they been built to observe, to contain, or perhaps to attract? The signal on my screen pulsed, a final sharp crescendo. The readings flatlined. The hum that had permeated the air vanished. The wind died down, leaving behind an unnerving stillness. It was as if the universe itself had held its breath. I stood there, frozen, my heart racing a frantic, silent rhythm against my ribs. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. It felt like a pause, a moment of calculation. The entity had registered my presence. It had responded, and now it was waiting for what? My breath plumed in front of me, a fleeting ghost against the colossal, silent sentinels. I had come to this place, this standing stone circle, older than recorded history, on a desperate hunch. It felt like madness, chasing spectral echoes across light years, and then across continents to a forgotten patch of Earth. But the data sang of an intelligence so vast, so ancient, that my own theories about pulsars and nebulae felt like children's scribbles. It was a pattern that demanded acknowledgement, a signature that pulsed with an alien intent. My headlamp beam, a stark white intrusion, swept across the stones. They stood in a perfect, unnerving circle, their tips reaching towards the bruised twilight sky like petrified fingers. Each was impassably massive, carved and placed with a precision that defied any known ancient technology, or any technology for that matter. The wind picked up, whistling a higher, more insistent tune now. It tugged at my coat, a phantom hand trying to pull me away, or perhaps push me deeper. I knelt, brushing away loose soil and moss from the base of the largest monolith. The earth here felt different, strangely compacted, as if it had been disturbed, and then meticulously reset countless times. My glove scraped against something hard, something that wasn't stone. It was a metallic shard, impassably thin, impassably smooth. I pulled it free. It was no bigger than my thumbnail, yet it felt impassably heavy, dense. There were markings on its surface, too fine to be seen clearly, intricate geometric patterns that seemed to writhe and reform the longer I looked at them. They were alien, utterly alien, yet they possessed a disturbing familiarity, a resonance with the cosmic data I had been poring over. This was not the work of any human civilization, past or present. This was a fragment, a discarded piece of something else. My heart began to beat a heavier rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was the thrum of discovery, the intoxicating thrill of touching something truly unknown. I moved to the next stone, then the next, my lamp beam dancing across their surfaces, my gloved hands searching the ground around their bases. It didn't take long. Beneath another monolith, I found more. A small, crystalline sphere, cool to the touch, humming with a faint, almost imperceptible vibration. And then a thin, flexible plate, etched with symbols that mirrored those on the shard, but more complex, more layered. As I tilted it, the symbols rearranged themselves, forming new patterns, new sequences. It was a language, a record, a testament. The wind seemed to hold its breath. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments. These stones, this circle, they weren't just markers of ancient human ritual. They were anchors, points of contact. And this shard, this sphere, this plate, they were remnants of visitors. Visitors from a time before time, from a place beyond the stars. The cosmic data had hinted at patterns of influence, anomalies in the fabric of space-time that suggested a deliberate hand at work. I had theorized about a universal architect, a cosmic gardener tending to its creation. But this was different. This was evidence of direct interaction, of technology, of presence. The symbols on the plate seemed to shift, coalescing into what looked like star charts, but not of our galaxy or any galaxy I recognized. They depicted pathways, connections, a vast network stretching across unimaginable distances. And then my gaze fell upon a series of etchings on the largest stone, almost hidden by lichen. They were crude, almost primitive but unmistakable. Figures, bipedal with elongated limbs and strangely shaped heads. They were depicted interacting with the monoliths, touching them, pointing towards the sky. And beside them, smaller, more abstract shapes. Symbols, the same symbols that adorned the metallic shard and the etched plate. The implication hit me with the force of a physical blow. These stones weren't just here before us. They were here because of something else. Something that had visited, that had left its mark, that had communicated. And the data, the anomalous cosmic data, was not just a record of their existence, but a map of their influence, a testament to their endless, tireless reach. The entity wasn't just a passive observer of the universe. It was an active participant, shaping worlds, seeding civilizations, leaving its indelible imprint across the eons. A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the circle, making me jump. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of stone. My lamp beam snapped to the monolith I had been examining. A new fissure, thin and jagged, had appeared on its surface, as if it had been struck by an invisible hammer. It was as if the stone itself was recoiling, wounded. My breath hitched. The sphere in my pocket pulsed, its internal light flaring, then dimming. The symbols on the plate seemed to writhe with a new urgency. The ancient intelligence, the one that had left these fragments, the one that had etched its story into the very bones of the earth, was it still here? There was this place more than just a historical site. There was it a communication hub, a forgotten outpost. And if so, who or what was it communicating with now? This place, the standing stone circle, older than recorded history, felt like a scar on the landscape, a wound that refused to close. I had come here seeking what? Solace. Answers. The same questions that had driven me from my observatory, from the sterile hum of my equipment, now seemed to mark me in the desolate expanse. My fingers brushed against a pattern etched into the stone, a series of concentric circles that seemed to writhe under my touch. It was too precise for natural erosion, too deliberate for ancient art. I'd seen similar symbols in the margins of my own notebooks, scribbled in moments of profound, unsettling insight. The anomaly. It wasn't just data anymore. And it was here, etched into rock that had witnessed the slow crawl of millennia. I pulled out my tablet, its screen a stark rectangle of light against the deepening twilight. The readings I'd managed to siphon from the network before I'd cut myself off were still there, a chaotic symphony of impassable frequencies. But now, looking at the carvings, a new pattern began to emerge. The arcs, the nodal points, the strange, recurring geometries. They mirrored the spectral lines, the gravitational distortions, the subtle, terrifying deviations in the cosmic background radiation that had consumed my every waking thought. My breath hitched. The entity, it wasn't just observing, it was communicating. The anomaly wasn't a passive discovery, it was an active signal, a beacon being raised, but to whom, and for what purpose? I scrolled through the data, my fingers fumbling, the dates. I'd been so focused on the what that I'd overlooked the when, the cycles, the recurring alignments. The anomaly pulsed with a rhythm, a slow, inexorable beat that I had previously dismissed as statistical noise. Now it sang a different tune, a countdown. My eyes darted to the sky, now a bruised purple as the last vestiges of the sun bled away. The stars were beginning to prick through, sharp and indifferent. I knew them, or I thought I did. I'd spent my life charting their predictable dances, but the data suggested a choreography far more complex, far more sinister. The anomaly wasn't just a snapshot of cosmic activity. It was a prediction, a meticulously calculated forecast of events yet to unfold. The monolith seemed to hum, a deep, resonant vibration that I felt in my bones. The symbols on the stone seemed to glow faintly, an internal luminescence that pulsed in time with the anomaly's rhythm. I zoomed in on a particular set of readings, a cluster of high-energy emissions that had baffled me for weeks. They weren't random. They were precisely timed, occurring in conjunction with a predicted gravitational lensing event, an event that would occur in. I checked the date on my tablet, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. It was less than a month away. This wasn't a passive observation. This was preparation. The entity, whatever it was not merely a cosmic curiosity. It was an architect, a sculptor of reality, and it was using the universe as its canvas. The anomaly was its brushstroke, the cosmic events its medium. And Earth, my insignificant, fragile planet, was about to become the focal point of its grand design. I looked back at the carved stone, at the alien geometry that now felt sickeningly familiar. This place, this circle of ancient stones, was not just a relic of human history. It was a marker, a testament to a time when something else had stood here, had looked up at the same stars, and had left its mark. Had it been a warning, or a testament to its own power? The wind howled, and for a moment I thought I heard a voice within it, a multitonal resonance that bypassed my ears and vibrated directly in my skull. It spoke of immense distances, of timescales so vast they made human history seem like a fleeting breath. It spoke of intention. The anomaly was a key, and the impending cosmic event was the lark, and the entity was turning the tumblers. My work, my life's pursuit of understanding the universe, had led me to this precipice. The knowledge I had so desperately sought was a terrifying burden. I was not just an observer of the cosmos. I was a witness to its impending unraveling. The question that burned in my mind, harder than any star, was not what this entity was, but what it intended to do with us. I was alone, miles from anywhere, with a truth that threatened to shatter the very fabric of existence. What was it preparing for? And why was Earth the stage? The wind howled, a sound that seemed to claw at the very edges of my sanity. It whipped my coat around me, a desperate embrace against the encroaching chill that had nothing to do with the late autumn air. I stood within the standing stone circle, older than recorded history, the colossal grey sentinels looming against a bruised twilight sky. Their surfaces, worn smooth by millennia of wind and rain, felt like the skin of ancient giants beneath my fingertips. My breath plumed white, a fleeting ghost in the gathering gloom. The data, the impassable, terrifying data, pulsed in my mind, a relentless drumbeat against my skull. It was no longer theoretical. It was here. I had to tell them. The weight of it was crushing, a physical burden that made each breath a struggle. I pulled out my satellite phone, its plastic casing slick with condensation. My fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the buttons. I needed to reach the observatory director, a pragmatic woman named Dr. Aris. He was the closest thing to a rational anchor in my increasingly turbulent world. "Thomas, what is it?" Her voice, tinny and distant, crackled through the speaker. She sounded weary, the way one does after a long day spent battling recalcitrant equipment and even more recalcitrant funding committees. "Aris, I need to listen to me. It's worse than I thought. The anomalies aren't just signals. They're actions. Something is manipulating the fabric of space-time, Aris, on a scale we can't even begin to comprehend." My voice trembled, betraying the carefully constructed calm I was trying to maintain. A pause. "Thomas," Dr. Aris began, her tone measured, "we've been over this. My grief, it's understandable. But these patterns I'm seeing, they're within the noise. Statistical fluctuations. We can run the diagnostics again, recalibrate the sensors." "No, it's not noise," I practically shouted, the sound swallowed by the vastness of the moor. "It's intelligent, it's deliberate. I found a resonance, a pattern that repeats, a signature." The stones seemed to press in, their silent presence a heavy accusation. "A language," Dr. Aris repeated, her voice now laced with a subtle edge of concern, but not the kind I desperately needed. It was the tone one uses with someone who has lost their grip. "Thomas, I read out there alone. It's late. The isolation. It can play tricks on the mind. Perhaps I should come back to the observatory. We can talk this through properly. Get I some rest." Rest. The word felt like a mockery. How could I rest when the very foundations of existence were being subtly, irrevocably altered? Rest. Aris, the earth is. We're being observed. More than observed. We're being shaped. And whatever is doing it. It's not benign. I can feel it. It's ancient and it's vast and it's... Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the faint murmur of her voice in the background, the rustle of papers. He was talking to someone else, dismissing me. "Thomas, I'm going to send the groundskeeper out to check on He'll bring back. We'll get a warm drink, and then we'll discuss my findings in the morning, when feeling more myself." The groundskeeper, burly, silent man who mostly kept to himself. He wouldn't understand. He'd see a man, alone in a stone circle, talking about cosmic horrors. He'd nod, his face impassive, and escort me back to my empty cottage. He'd report me as, "What? Disturbed, unstable. Aris, please." My voice was a raw plea now. "I have to believe me, the data. I can send it to I can show the correlations, the intent behind the shifts." "Thomas, I'm hanging up now. The groundskeeper is on his way." I slumped against one of the monoliths, the rough stone biting through my coat. My own people, my colleagues. They saw my grief, my obsession, and dismissed the terrifying truth as a symptom of my broken state. I was alone. Utterly, irrevocably alone, with a truth so profound, so horrifying, that it threatened to shatter the very sky above me. The wind picked up again, a mournful dirge that seemed to mark my isolation. The stones stood silent, indifferent witnesses to my despair. Was this how it began? The slow, insidious unraveling, starting with the mind, then the world. And if they wouldn't listen, what hope was there? The receiver felt cold against my ear, a dead thing now. The silence that rushed in was thick, suffocating. I pushed myself away from the ancient stone, my muscles protesting with a dull ache. The groundskeeper. He would come, a figure of mundane authority in a world that had just tilted on its axis. But he wouldn't understand. None of them would. They saw numbers. I saw more. The wind whipped around the standing stone circle, older than recorded history, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something sharp and metallic, like ozone after a storm that never broke. I pulled my coat tighter, the rough wool of familiar, grounding sensation against my skin. Familiarity was a lie, though. Nothing felt familiar anymore. Not since I'd seen the patterns that shouldn't exist, the impossibilities woven into the very fabric of the universe. I walked between the towering sentinels of rock, their surfaces etched with runes that defied translation. They had stood here for millennia, silent witnesses to the slow crawl of time. Had they felt it? The shifting, the subtle pressure that had begun to press down on my own mind. It was like a weight, invisible but crushing, a constant hum beneath the threshold of hearing. A growing awareness, not mine, but in mine. I reached the center of the circle, where the earth was worn smooth by countless feet, or perhaps something else entirely. The sky above was a bruised purple, the last vestiges of daylight bleeding away. They seemed to pulse, not with their usual steady glow, but with a frantic, irregular rhythm. It was like looking at a dying ember or a frantic heartbeat. My breath hitched. It was happening. The anomaly, not just in the data anymore. It was here. Now. The air crackled, not with electricity, but with a palpable presence. My hands trembled. I clenched them into fists, the knuckles turning white. The stones themselves seemed to absorb the light, their grey surfaces deepening to an inky black. A low vibration began, not through the air, but through the soles of my boots, up my legs, into my very bones. It was a resonant frequency, a deep thrum that felt like the universe clearing its throat. My vision swam. The edges of my sight began to blur, the solid forms of the stones wavering as if seen through heat haze. But it wasn't heat, it was something else. A distortion. I thought of Sarah, her laugh. The way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. These memories, once a balm, now felt like shards of glass, tearing at me. They were anchors, and the tide was rising, threatening to pull them away. I couldn't let that happen, I wouldn't. The vibration intensified. It was no longer a hum, but a deep, guttural groan, emanating from the earth, from the stones, from the very air. The stars above began to shift, not in their usual celestial dance, but in a chaotic, sickening swirl. It was like watching a painter spill their entire palette, colors bleeding into each other, forms dissolving. My stomach churned. I fought the urge to retch. It was a chorus of alien thought, a symphony of the incomprehensible. It pressed against my mind, not with malice, but with an overwhelming indifference. I was an ant under a magnifying glass, observed, catalogued, and then erased. This wasn't just an observation. This was an intervention, a reordering. The fundamental laws I had dedicated my life to understanding were being rewritten, not by a divine hand, but by a cosmic accountant, balancing cosmic books with a brutal, unfeeling logic. I scrambled for the small satchel I'd brought. My fingers fumbled with the clasp, the smooth leather slick with sweat. Inside, nestled amongst a few personal effects, was the device. The one I had cobbled together from salvaged components, the one that was meant to send a message. A desperate, futile gesture, I had told myself. But now, it felt like the only hope. The light from the sky was no longer starlight. It was a sickly, phosphorescent glow, emanating from everywhere and nowhere at once. The air grew heavy, thick with an unnatural pressure. My lungs burned with each shallow breath. I had to activate it, before the coherence of my own thoughts dissolved entirely, before the entity's awareness, so vast and ancient, solidified into something that would consume me, consume everything. My fingers closed around the cool metal of the device. It was crude, imperfect, a child's toy against an unfathomable power. But it was mine. It was all I had. The groundskeeper would find me here, I knew, or what was left of me. But he would also find this, a testament, a warning. I raised the device, my arm shaking uncontrollably. The hum intensified, a physical force now, pushing against me, trying to pry open my mind to show me everything. But I held on for Sarah, for the memory of a world that was. The light flared. Was it enough? Was any of this enough? The air tasted like dust and ozone. My breath hitched, a ragged sound swallowed by the vast, indifferent sky. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down, muffling the usual chirps of unseen insects, the distant sigh of the wind through the skeletal trees. I was still within the embrace of the standing stone circle, older than recorded history, the rough, cool granite still anchoring me to a world I no longer recognized. Where was the hum, the low, resonant thrum that had vibrated not just through the stones, but through my very bones? It was gone, replaced by this absolute stillness, a void that felt more terrifying than any sound. My hands, still slick with the strange, viscous residue from the receiver, trembled as I wiped them on my trousers. The fabric came away stained with a faint, iridescent sheen. I looked up. The sky, it was wrong, not dark, not light. A bruised, purplish twilight that seemed to bleed into itself. The stars, or what passed for them now, were not points of distant fire. They were smears like careless strokes of paint on a canvas, their colors shifting, bleeding into nebulous forms that hinted at geometry I couldn't quite grasp. They weren't there, not in the way stars ought to be. They felt closer, yet infinitely farther away. My stomach churned. It wasn't nausea, not exactly. It was a deep, primal disorientation, a sense of being unmoored from the fundamental laws of existence. The very air felt thinner, harder to draw into my lungs. Each inhale was a conscious effort, a desperate grasping for something that was no longer there. The groundskeeper, I'd thought of him, a tangible anchor to the mundane. But he wouldn't come. Not now, not into this. The world outside the circle, I suspected, was equally altered. The familiar contours of the rolling hills, the distant line of the woods, they were probably still there, but imbued with a subtle wrongness, a veneer of the impossible laid over the ordinary. I tried to stand, my legs stiff and uncooperative. The movement felt clumsy, alien. My own body seemed to be a stranger, its familiar weight and balance subtly off-kilter. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the surface of one of the massive standing stones. It was no longer just granite. It felt porous, alive. Faint warmth emanated from its core, not the warmth of the sun, but something internal, something ancient and slow. The data, the final transmission, the entity, it hadn't just observed, it had acted, and its action had rippled outwards, rewriting the very fabric of existence. I had seen it, heard it, felt it, and now I was trapped in its wake. A faint breeze stirred, carrying with it a scent I couldn't place. It wasn't the damp earth or the decaying leaves. It was something sharp, metallic, and yet sweet, like honey that had been left out too long in the rain. It prickled the back of my throat, a phantom sensation that made me want to gag. I stumbled forward, away from the stones, my eyes scanning the landscape. The trees at the edge of the clearing seemed to writhe, their branches elongating, twisting into impossible angles. They pulsed, almost imperceptibly, like the slow beat of a hidden heart. My mind raced, trying to impose order on the chaos. This couldn't be real. It was a hallucination, a byproduct of the stress, the grief, the sheer impossibility of what I had witnessed. This was no dream. This was the new reality. I remembered Alina's face, her laugh. They were those memories still real, or had they too been subtly altered by the pervasive influence of whatever was out there? It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of possibility. The universe, as I knew it, had been a place of infinite, wondrous unknowns. Now it felt like a closed room, its walls shifting, its dimensions contracting. I looked back at the standing stone circle, older than recorded history. It seemed to shimmer at the edges, as if it were a memory itself, a phantom of a world that was rapidly fading. The stones were no longer just markers of an ancient past. They were conduits, points of interface, and I had been foolish enough to stand too close when the connection was made. What had I done? Unraveling. The iridescent stain on my hands seemed to glow faintly in the peculiar twilight. It was a brand, a mark of my involvement. A low, guttural sound, like stone grinding against stone, echoed from the woods. It was faint, barely audible, but it carried an immense weight. It was the sound of something vast and ancient stirring. Something that had noticed me, something that was now awake. I held my breath, straining to hear over the frantic thumping in my own ears. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by a rustling that was too heavy, too deliberate for any animal. Had I truly understood the implications of the data, or had I merely glimpsed a fraction of a truth so immense, so terrible, that it was designed to shatter the mind? I was alone, surrounded by a reality that was actively resisting its own definition. What waited for me in the deepening gloom? I was still within the embrace of the standing stone circle, older than recorded history. The monolithic grey slabs, worn smooth by millennia of wind and rain, hummed with a low, almost imperceptible vibration beneath my bare feet. It was a resonance that had started days ago, growing from a faint tremor in my bones to a constant thrum that vibrated in my teeth. I'd come here seeking answers, or perhaps just a place where the universe's vastness felt less like a void and more like a presence. My wife, Alara, had loved this place. She'd seen patterns in the lichen-etched stones, heard whispers in the wind that swept through the ancient ring. It pulsed from the stones, from the very soil beneath me, a direct download into my consciousness. The data streams I'd detected, the impossible anomalies in the cosmic background radiation, they were not just signals. They were thoughts, and they were vast. My hands trembled as I reached out, my fingertips brushing against the cool, rough surface of the largest stone. The vibration intensified, a wave of alien logic washing over me. It was the intelligence, the one I'd glimpsed in the star charts, in the distortions of space-time. It was here, woven into the fabric of this ancient place, a nexus point. It wasn't observing from some distant galaxy. It was the galaxy and more. It was the architecture of existence itself. The truth, when it finally coalesced, was a blinding, terrifying dawn. The universe wasn't a playground for blind, random forces. It was a garden, meticulously tended. And we, humanity, were a brief, insignificant bloom, destined to wither. Alara had sensed it too, in her own way. Her melancholic pronouncements about the fleeting nature of beauty, her fascination with decay and renewal, she'd been closer to understanding than I, with all my equations and spectral analyses, had ever been. The entity didn't communicate through radio waves or gravitational anomalies. It communicated through existence itself. The laws of physics, the dance of galaxies, the very flow of time, these were its expressions. My discoveries weren't a breakthrough, they were an awakening. The cosmic hum I felt was its attention, a subtle shift in its vast, incomprehensible awareness. It had noticed the ripples we were making. The ozone smell intensified, sharp and metallic. The air grew heavy, charged with an energy that made the fine hairs on my arms stand on end. I saw it then, not with my eyes, but with a deeper sense, a newly awakened part of my mind. The entity was not a single being, but a collective consciousness, ancient beyond imagining, spanning dimensions I couldn't even conceive. It was the sculptor of reality, and it was looking at Earth. My own thoughts felt like tiny sparks, insignificant against this cosmic tide. The scales had tipped. We were no longer observers of the universe. We were part of its grand, terrifying design, being reshaped by forces beyond our wildest nightmares. The patterns Alara had seen in the stones were not just ancient art, they were blueprints, and the entity was beginning to draw. A faint, sickly green light began to emanate from the center of the standing stone circle, older than recorded history. It pulsed rhythmically, a slow, deliberate heartbeat. The ground beneath me trembled, not with the familiar vibration of the stones, but with a deeper, more fundamental shift. It felt as if the very foundations of the world were being loosened. I could feel the subtle recalibration of everything. My own body felt alien, the familiar framework of bone and muscle suddenly less substantial. I looked at my hands, expecting to see them shimmer or fade, but they remained solid, though unnervingly detached from my sense of self. The universe was not ours to explore. It was a canvas, and we were about to be painted over. I could hear it now, a faint, crystalline ringing, like the shattering of a million delicate bells, each note carrying a universe of sorrow and indifference. It was the sound of change. It was the sound of everything being reordered. My own existence felt like a forgotten footnote in a story I could no longer comprehend. The grief for Alara, once a consuming inferno, now felt like a distant ember, a memory of a different kind of pain. It was the realization that even our deepest sorrows were merely a fleeting anomaly in a cosmic tapestry of unimaginable scale and purpose. The ringing grew louder, more insistent. The green light pulsed faster, brighter. I closed my eyes, not in resignation, but in a desperate attempt to hold onto the last vestiges of my own reality. The universe was not empty. It was occupied, and its occupants were finally taking notice. What would become of us when the grand design was complete?